Hi and welcome to MRCP Made Easy. Today we'll be dealing with second part of the brachial plexus. For those of you who have not watched our first video on brachial plexus, please do go back and watch our first video so you'll be able to understand what our second video is all about. So if you guys remember, in our last lecture we spoke about the extension of the brachial plexus, how to remember it at the tips of our fingers by using our, then we used our mnemonic where we had our guy going out on a Saturday morning for a fishing trip, and he was quite thirsty, so he had to reach out to drink cold beer. Then we learned how to draw brachial plexus by writing C5 to T1 on a piece of paper. Then we learned how to draw two Y's and the Y in the middle facing the opposite direction, followed by two E's and an X. And then we used our mnemonic reach to drink cold beer to label our diagram as roots, trunks, division, chords and branches. We followed that up with another mnemonic called as most alcoholics must really urinate, because once you start drinking beer you're gonna have the urge to urinate. So we used our second mnemonic and we labeled our diagram as musculocutaneous, axillary, median, radial and ulnar, and then we said that C5, C6, C7 combines together as wings to heaven, and damage causes winging of scapula, and that's why long thoracic nerve causes winging of scapula. After that we looked at the individual nerves. We spoke about the musculocutaneous. We said it's a nerve that behaves like a muscle, that looks like a muscle and sounds like a muscle. So if you damage the musculocutaneous nerve, you'll not be able to flex and show off your muscles. Then we spoke about the axillary nerve. We spoke about its course of action, then that it supplies the deltoid and teres minor, and we said that there is a loss of abduction from 15 to 90 degrees when there is damage to this this nerve. And then we looked at the sensory, and we said that the regimental batch area, there will be loss of sensation if you damage your musculocutaneous nerve. Sorry, not your musculocutaneous, your axillary nerve. Yeah, sorry about that. Next we spoke about the median nerve, and we told that it is a VVIP nerve, and we looked at its course and its motor function, and we also looked at the fact that the recurrent branch supplies the thenar eminence. We learned that TH stands for thumb, so the thenar eminence is close to your thumb. We spoke about the sensory supply. We said it supplies the lateral 3.5 fingers, the palmar surface, and the superior dorsal aspect or the fingertips. Next, we learned about the three ways the median nerve can be injured. One was carpal tunnel syndrome, which was inflammation of the flexor retinaculum. Then we spoke about fracture, supracondylar fracture of the humerus and lunate dislocation. After that, we learned the fact that you will not be able to do opposition, and there will be thenar atrophy or atrophy if you damage this nerve. Then we tried to differentiate distal medial claw hand from a proximal medial claw hand, where we said that in proximal claw hand, median claw hand, you try to punch someone but you end up blessing them, hence the name Pope's blessing. Whereas in median clawing, the second and the third finger stays flexed. After that, we used our mnemonic median trap to learn about the different causes of carpal tunnel syndrome and what can happen in that. And once we were done with that, we ended at radial nerve. So today's lecture, we'll be looking at radial nerve, we'll be looking at ulnar nerve, the ways to test the ulnar nerve, and we'll be looking at some of the lesions of the brachial plexus. So let's get into today's lecture. Are you guys ready for this? I am. So let's get into this lecture. So radial nerve, let's do this now. This course of this nerve is that it runs in the radial groove in humerus. Now where is this radial groove, some of you might ask. So I have put a beautiful picture over here for you to remember. Now this little groove over here is called the radial groove. Why is it called the radial groove? Well, the radial nerve runs along with it, man. So it's called the radial groove. So that makes our life easy. So it runs in the radial groove, and the motor supply of this nerve is it supplies three important muscles. It supplies the tricep. There is a radial in this brachioradialis, so it supplies brachioradialis, and it also supplies the extensors of the wrist. Now the sensory is quite easy. It supplies the posterior aspect of the arm and the forearm, below the fingertips of the medial 3.5 fingers. So let's look at that in detail. What are we exactly talking about? So if you look at this diagram over here, this is the sensory supply. The lower lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, the posterior cutaneous nerve of the arm. So the lateral and the posterior cutaneous nerve of the arm, posterior cutaneous nerve of forearm, and also the superficial branch. So these are the different kinds of branches that it supplies. So it supplies the lower lateral cutaneous nerve of arm, posterior cutaneous nerve of arm, posterior cutaneous nerve of forearm, and the superficial branch. So this is the sensory supply of the radial nerve. Now, what are the different ways in which you can injure this? Now, the injury is pretty simple. Since we are talking about the humerus aspect, so a fracture to the body of the humerus can cause a radial nerve injury. The second cause is a Saturday night palsy, where there is compression of the nerve in the axilla. So let's look at what Saturday night palsy is all about. But before that, I have a diagram for you over here to describe to you the distribution of the various nerves. So this is the radial, here is the median nerve supply, and this is the ulnar nerve. So if you have any doubts, you can remember this diagram and have this picture stored at the back of your head. So close your eyes and just imagine this picture. Imagine that, this person over here, looks half like Hulk. The Hulk part is the ulnar nerve. The other side, he looks a bit like Thanos' head, which is a bit pinkish in color. So a person having a hand which looks half like Hulk, half like Thanos. Thanos is radial, well, Hulk is ulnar. So that's how we remember it, right? Now let's get into the Saturday night palsy. What is the Saturday night palsy, man? Now, we were talking about beer, right? Our guy going to the beach on a Saturday morning. So, well, he has had to, he has done his fishing, he's come back home, and he's having a hangover basically, or you could say that he's quite already drunk. He tried urinating, but, that didn't flush out the alcohol out of his body. So he's quite tired, he's watching TV, he's quite tired to do anything. So, and while he's watching TV, he falls asleep in this way. Now this causes entrapment of the radial nerve in the axillary region called Saturday night palsy, resulting in a complete wrist drop. Now know that in case of a radial nerve entrapment, there is a complete wrist drop. Okay, whereas in median nerve we spoke about the the blessing part, right? And the distal and the proximal clawing. But in radial, it's pretty simple and straightforward. The entire wrist drops down. The other way where there can be entrapment is clutch paralysis. People using clutch, they use it in an improper way. Again, there can be compression in the axillary region causing wrist drop. So Saturday night palsy and clutch paralysis are two fairly common conditions in someone's daily life which can cause radial nerve entrapment. Now once we're done with that, let's look at our another VVIP nerve. So I forgot to write about this nerve. So this is also a VIP nerve. So this nerve, what does it do? Now this VIP nerve, it has a course. Where is this course? It runs behind the medial epicondyle and it runs superficial to the flexor retinaculum. So its function is something to do with the wrists, right? We will look at it in just a bit. And the motor supply is, since it runs in the flexor retinaculum, take it from me that it supplies the medial flexus of the wrist, right? And in the hand, it supplies the hypothenar eminence. Remember over there, thenar eminence in median nerve. This is the opposite. Ulnar says, okay, median, you want to supply thenar, I'll take hypothenar. So it's supplying the hypothenar eminence. And then it supplies all the interosseous muscles of the hand and the medial lumbricals. Well, sensory is quite important. Let's look at it. Dorsal and palmar aspect of hand for medial 1.5 finger. What do you mean by that? It's quite complicated. I mean, those words. I don't like this word. So let's look at the picture. So this is the ulnar nerve supplying the 1.5 fingers. Look at this ulnar, this over here. And then this is the median nerve supply and this is the radial nerve supply, right? Again, you need to remember Hulk and Thanos. Well, injury, since we are talking about the fact that it runs posterior to medial epicondyle, so a fracture of the medial epicondyle will result in an ulnar nerve damage. The other part is fracture of hook of hamate. Remember in median we spoke about lunate dislocation? Well, this says, ulnar nerve again says, man, median, you want to take lunate, take. I'm going to take hamate. So the ulnar goes for hamate. So the hook of hamate. Right. So remember we spoke about the different clawings. Now this is how you differentiate. This is a radial nerve damage where there is a complete drop of the wrist. This is a median nerve, and this is an ulnar clawing. Remember, medial 1.5 fingers. So 1.5 fingers. These fingers are affected over here. I mean, these last two digits are affected. So when the patient tries to open the hand, he will not be able to extend his fourth and fifth digit, and there will be hypothenar atrophy or atrophy. Well, how do you test this? Pretty simple. There is a test called as a book test, and the sign is called as a Foreman's sign. Now what do? Imagine we have a patient coming to us. We want to test his ulnar nerve. You give a piece of paper to the patient between his two hands, and you ask him to hold it in this way between the thumb and the index finger. Now if the patient does not have an ulnar nerve palsy, this is how he will hold it. But if there is an ulnar nerve palsy, you can notice that the bend in the thumb, there is a bridging of this thumb. Why is that happening? Because there is compensatory flexion of the interphalangeal joint. So there is this bend that can be noticed, or the bridging of the thumb that can be noticed if there is an ulnar nerve palsy. If you notice this, it is a positive Frohman's sign, and your book test is successful. You are able to find out if the patient is having an ulnar nerve injury or not. Right. So now let's look at the lesions of the brachial plexus. So we have two. We have Herb Duchesne's and we have Klumpke's. Now if you notice that I have highlighted U in Herb Duchesne's and I have highlighted L. Now there's a reason for that. Why I have done that? Let's see. In Herb Duchesne's palsy, the upper trunk is involved. So there is a lesion of the upper trunk, C5 and C6. So U stands for upper trunk. L stands for lower trunk. So Herb Duchesne palsy is a lesion of the upper trunk lesion C5 and C6. The way to remember it is, if there is a lesion of this C5 and C6, the patient has something called as the waiter's tip. So it is pretty simple, but if you forget it, you can remember it as Herb calls dips on tip. Okay, so I really personally don't use this, but if you want, I have put it there. If you want, you can use it if it helps you. The main thing to remember is the upper trunk is involved. The U stands for upper trunk, C5 and C6, and the cause is a trauma or a traumatic birth injury. During birth, if the an infant has an injury, it can cause Herb Duchesne palsy. Now what happens in Herb Duchesne palsy? You would notice that the limb is hanging by the side. So the limb hangs by the side, it is medially rotated and it is pronated. Look at this, medially rotated, pronated, hanging by the side. And one important thing that can be asked to you is that it is always associated with Horner syndrome. Right, and next is Klumpke's. So L stands for lower trunk lesions, the C8 and T1. Common causes are Pancoast and traumatic injury that can happen during birth. These are the two important causes that can happen. The other thing is the findings. Now since we have been talking about alcohol, now we need to know that Klumpke's, the person with Klumpke's is going to consume rum. So they're going to be damage to the radial, ulnar and medium. So there will be loss of all lumbricals. All the fingers will be clawed and forearm flexors and extensors are lost. And this is how it looks like in case of Klumpke. Right? So Herb Duchesne and Klumpke. So U stands for upper trunk, L stands for lower trunk. Klumpke's palsy, you need to remember, since you're talking about alcohol, that the patient is high on rum. So therefore the radial, ulnar, median, everything is affected and all the fingers will be clawed, and this is how the fingers look like. Well, so that's going to do it guys for today. So if you think you got something out of today's lecture, then please do like, subscribe and share our video, and keep watching MRCP Made Easy. Until next time, keep reading and keep revising and keep watching our videos, and if you have any suggestions and comments, do write to us and we'll be more than happy to get back to you. Thank you so much. Take care and bye-bye.